Hi everyone, it's Jill Foster here for Penny Black, and today we're going to be making 3 different cards, each showing different ways to use our new Hexagon Frames die set. So before we begin, I just wanted to give you a look here at this 51-640 Hexagon Frames die set. I love this die set. There are so many different ways you can use it: windows, layering, frames, and I'm going to show you 3 different ways that I used it on these cards. And just a reminder, I will have a full supply list of everything I'm using in the video up on screen at the very end of the video, so you can just hit pause and check it out in more detail at that time if you would like. So here's a look at the first card that we'll be creating, and you can see I'm just very simply using the hexagon frame just to add some extra detail to my background. Now all of the painting that I'm going to be doing in this video features Arteza gouache paints, which I've just put on an old palette I think I got at Walmart, mixed with Distress ink re-inkers used as watercolors. These are my current favorites of both of these mediums, and I have the list of which colors are on my palette included in that supply list up on screen at the end of the video. So for this card, I have die cut our rose die from Canson 140-pound watercolor paper. It's cold press, and I'm going to paint it with these colors. So I love that with die cuts you can get, especially beautiful ones like this, the look of like a no-line watercolor painting, but you don't have to worry about stamping it, staying in the lines, any of that. You can just die cut it from your watercolor paper and paint it exactly as you would like. And with roses, you have so many different options for colors and backgrounds, and they work great for all different occasions: birthdays, Valentine, anniversaries, wedding, friendship. You can do yellow roses for friendship, whatever you would like, and this rose is just a beauty once it is painted. Now if you've never used gouache paints give you more of an opaque look, and the Distress ink re-inkers give a very vibrant look, and I love how by mixing these two together I can get a very sort of creamy yet vibrant look to the painting that I am doing. So you can see there, I got my green. I started painting the green before the red was dry. So I am drying that with my heat tool, and now going back in with the greens. That way they do not blend or bleed together. The Distress ink re-inkers as well as the gouache paints, once they're on your palette, they can stay on there. So the gouache paints are going to squeeze out almost like an acrylic paint, and you can use them just like that. But once they dry, they're going to be hard. All you need to do is add water and it will reactivate those paints. And the Distress ink re-inkers just stay liquid like that. And so I just keep this palette handy. It's got my favorite colors currently, and I love mixing and matching them. Once part of your image is dry, like you can see here on the rose, you can go back and add more layers. I love that with the gouache paints you can go back in and add more lights if you want. So if you've left out any highlights, you can go back in with those and lighten areas because they're more opaque. You can layer them over light colors over darker colors. I can also take here on those leaves, I just wanted a little bit more punch to those, so I'm adding some of the Distress ink re-inker on top of the area that I had painted with the gouache paints. So there's no right or wrong way to do it. I just play around with different layers, fix things up as I'm going. Like here you can see I'm adding in a little bit more lighter colors. So I also die cut this from some 110-pound cardstock, and I'm going to just glue them right on top of each other, and it just gives this painted piece more dimension. I think it makes it stand out on the card more. And because it has some delicate small areas, it would be hard to add like a foam adhesive behind that. But by just gluing it on top of another die cut piece, which will match up perfectly, you can get that extra dimension to your card. Now this is another piece of Canson 140-pound watercolor paper. I'm using some of that gouache paint mixed with a little bit of water and just doing a side to side brush stroke, very loose and very simple background for this card. I wanted it to have a sunny color to the background that would just make that red rose pop right off of there. I also wanted to use one of our sentiments that refer to sunshine, so I wanted to have this be bright. Now I always start light with my backgrounds and then go in darker because you can always add more color, but sometimes it is harder to take it away. So you can see here I just keep building up that color. I started with the gouache and now I'm adding just a little bit of that Distress Ink Reinker used as a watercolor to add a little extra pizzazz and lightness to it. And I'll be ready to layer on my die cut pieces. So here I wanted to add some splatters, but I didn't want them on my sentiment, so I've covered that up with a sticky note and I am splattering that on. I'll dry that and then I'll be ready to layer on the pieces. So the sentiment is stamped from our new transparent stamp set, Dream Love Sentiments. You might want to hit pause and check these out. They are awesome sentiments. The one I'm using is I Look at You and See Sunshine. And you can see I layered those onto the card, and I also die cut that hexagon frame twice and glued them together to give that extra dimension. So moving on to the next card, this time the die cuts that I am painting are the roses from our die set 51-405 Love and Roses. So I die cut those from Canson 140-pound watercolor paper, and I'm painting them with the same paints that I used previously. So my palette that has a mix of gouache and Distress Ink Reinkers used as watercolors. I'm using some of the die lines or the cut lines that provide an outline just to guide me where to add some darker colors and lighter colors. And that just gives these more dimension once they are painted. I can mix in more colors while the paint is wet and then blend them by using my paintbrush. When I go into blend, I often, off camera there, I am dipping my paintbrush into the water, patting it on a paper towel, and then going into blend. That way I don't have too much water on my paintbrush. So here I am working on the leaves. And then again, this time I've cut the hexagon frames and I've cut it twice. I'm going to paint them in the similar colors as my background and layer them just offset slightly. My sentiment is stamped from our sentiment set, which is 30-786 Dream Love Sentiments. Again, a really fun sentiment set, which I stamped just down at the bottom. So you can see how beautifully, just with that hexagon die set for the background, just completely finishes off this card. Now both of those cards were 4 1/4 by 5 1/2, a standard A2 size card. For the next card, I'm using our Creative Die 51-304 Pop Out Rose, and I'm going to be making a square card that is 5 1/2 by 5 1/2 inches. So I'm going to use those same painting techniques here onto this rose. Now this rose, you can sort of bend up and curl up those edges there where does cut to give it even more dimension. I'm going to use them to guide me on where I want to add my shading and my darkest colors. So I'm just getting an all over wash of color onto the rose. Then I'm going in, you can see, using those lines as a guide and kind of darkening up some areas. I ended up just, I guess, pushing that all over the rose because I felt like it just was too pale. So I'm adding a little bit more layers right on top here. So the Distress Ink Reinkers will give me that bolder color. And now here's where I'm going in and adding that shading along those edges of the die. This makes it super simple to add shading to this rose, and you can see once it is done, it gives it such dimension. So the background yellows are dry, that way this doesn't create one giant blob of color. And then I'm just going in now with the Distress Ink Reinker. I can lift up, pop up those edges to get my brush there in between. And if you get any areas where you got the paint that you didn't want it, just re-wet it and then pick it up with your paintbrush. Sort of a thirsty, drier brush will lift up that color. Now here's something I love about those gouache paints. Here I'm using a white gouache paint and going in along the edges of that rose and adding some white highlights. And this again will really give this some beautiful dimension. It's hard to believe this is just one flat layered die cut piece once you are done painting it, and it is so fun to paint because it's easy. For me, I love sort of mindless painting where I can just enjoy the colors, enjoy watching them spread and blend, and not have to think too much about where to put darks and where to put lights. But as you see, this white with that gouache paint just really, I think, takes it to the next level, and it's so easy to do and very forgiving because if you're like me at all, I often forget to leave some of those white areas for highlights, and this lets me sort of cheat and go back in there and add them. Now this pop-out rose die set also comes with some great leaves, so I'm going to paint those as well so that everything has that really hand-painted look. Keeping the darker color towards the base of the leaves and lighter towards the tips of the leaves. Now this time I have used the hexagon frames again, but I have sort of turned them on different angles and also inlaid one into the background so I could create a bit of a window to tuck down in my rose. I also stamped a sentiment from our new sentiment stamp set 30-792 Love Quotes. And here's a look at that finished card, and you can see what a difference, what design possibilities those hexagon frames add to whatever you're stamping or die cutting. I thank you so much for watching today's video. Please be sure to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to our YouTube channel. You can also connect with Penny Black on Facebook, Instagram, Pinterest, Twitter, as well as our blog and website, and I will link all of those for you along with the Penny Black products used today down in the YouTube description box below. And if you stay tuned, those supplies that I promised will be up on screen in just a moment, and you can hit pause and check them out.